Hi everyone, welcome to this Hangout about designing for a better mobile web. My name is Frederick. I'm an account manager with the large customer sales team for South Africa based in Dublin. And I'm joined today by Jenny Go, who at the moment is in London. Welcome Jenny, and thanks for joining us.
Hello, good to be here.
So Jenny, you've been at Google for more than 8 years.
Yes, that's right.
Would you like to tell us a bit of the work you do with us?
Sure. I'm a user experience researcher in the user experience group in the ads group. And so that means I work closely with designers and product managers on everything we can do to make our products better for consumers and for advertisers and publishers.
Excellent. So I actually had the privilege of hearing your presentation just yesterday, so I know we're in for a treat today, and I won't hold you up much longer. The only thing I do want to point out before we begin is to all our viewers that there's the Q&A app on the right-hand side of your screen, and during the presentation, if there are any questions that you would like to submit, then please feel free to do so through the app. You can do it in the lower right corner. And then at the end of the Hangout, we have some time for a Q&A where we'll try to answer as many questions as possible.
Great.
So with those words, Jenny, over to you.
Okay, thank you. Well, it's great to be here today. Thank you so much for tuning in. So I'm here today to talk about designing for a mobile mind, about creating great design for smartphone websites. So as Frederick said, my name is Jenny Gove, and I'm a user experience researcher here at Google. Before we get into our latest learnings on how to design great mobile websites, I want to tell you a story about a missed opportunity. It was a mobile experience I had towards the holidays last year. So it was coming up to holiday party season at the end of last year, and I just arrived home from a really long day at work, and I gladly fell on my couch. And immediately upon getting home, I don't know if this happens to you, but all the needs I haven't attended to tend to come to my mind. Now, I'm a mum of 3, and so there's quite a lot of home needs that are outstanding usually, lots of things for me to do. And one of these was getting a costume that my daughter had wanted for an upcoming holiday party. She wanted to be a snow queen for this party, and it was getting pretty near to the date of the party, and so pretty late to shop for this. So as I remembered this, sitting on my couch, I pulled out my phone to see what I could find for my 6-year-old girl. And my search brought me to a site that I hadn't visited before. The costume that I found looked just right, so I went to purchase it. But trouble was, I was confronted with this horrible looking form. There was no guest checkout, and I sort of groaned when I saw this. Now, there were a couple of options open to me. I could have got up and walked the 10 foot to turn on my desktop computer and hope that I could find the site and that completing that registration process and purchasing the clothes would have been a lot easier. But that's the thing with mobile now. We are getting used to buying things on our mobile devices, at least I have, and we have high expectations. We're not necessarily out and about when we use mobile. We might well be at home on the couch like I was and not wanting to move. So what did I do instead? Well, I navigated over to a very popular, well-known merchant site that I'd visited many times before, which, if I could find a Snow Queen outfit on their site, it would make purchasing a whole lot easier for me. So I found a suitable Snow Queen costume on that site, and I ended up purchasing from there, all on my phone while I was still happily sitting on the couch. So done, click. There she is, my daughter in her Snow Queen costume, and this is the one I bought. So that original Snow Queen costume was beautiful. I wish I'd had the energy to purchase it because it was indeed nicer. But in the circumstances to gain my business, this business would have had to make purchasing a whole lot easier and more seamless for me. That original site, they had actually done quite well. It started off by giving me very much confidence. It was a nicely optimized site, and I tend to notice these things, but they really hadn't done well enough, because they'd lost someone who was about to purchase. So the lesson from this is that we want to avoid throwing money away, certainly money away from users committed to purchasing, like I was in this case. So why are we talking about this now, here in 2014? Well, hopefully everybody out there knows and seen many figures like this before. There's an amazing growth of mobile use, increasing adoption and increasing conversion on mobile. And this graph shows the dramatic growth in mobile usage as a percentage of web usage. That's page views. Just from May last year to May this year. And the growth is strong everywhere. And all this growth is great, right? Because, I mean, using our devices is always a good experience, right? Just like this. Well, this is a bit of a joke. It's, you know, some of the marketing we see for mobile devices that would have us believe that using a mobile device results in the happiest people in the world. Happy people smiling and using their mobile devices without the problems I had, without so much of a squint or any slight frustration. But, you know, you and I know that in reality, the experience can be a bit more like this. Yeah, that's kind of how I felt when I saw those long forms and, you know, the registration process I needed to go through. Well, as a user experience researcher, I observe people's use of mobile websites and hear a lot of consumers' opinions about them. And in the past, I've heard them describe mobile sites as being cut down, harder to navigate, sparse in features, smaller, it seems like that to people, poor on design, and unfamiliar. It seems sometimes very different to the desktop experience they're used to. People can be worried that they might miss something, and they often have a sense of time urgency when they're on their mobile. Well, we want to fix these poor experiences. And good news is we know it can be done because there's some examples of really great sites out there that are engaging users. Let's take a look at some examples. So the Huffington Post, they redesigned their site for mobile, and that work led to great success for them. It resulted in 50% more time spent on the mobile site. And they had 37% more mobile unique visitors. So the visitors went up by a huge amount, really. And they reached 29% of all US mobile users. So huge success for them. And then PlusNet is a telco, and they redesigned all their sites, their desktop site, their mobile site. They did them all through the creation of a responsive site. And from that, they gained a 10-fold increase in mobile conversions. And the time for people to convert on mobile decreased 40%. And then cancer.org, that's the American Cancer Society, they went mobile. And this resulted in a 250% increase in mobile visits and a 3 times increase in mobile revenue. And of course, for them, that's donations. And they saw a higher rate of mobile access to key areas of their site. And you know, when you consider cancer and cancer.org and their mission, that's really important for them. The mobile site is, you know, the mobile web is sometimes can be considered as a very personal thing. Your phone is a very personal device. And distributing information to people about something like cancer, you want to make sure that people are able to get to everything they need to get to. And I love this quote of realization from the cancer.org team. The principal for digital platforms said that it was mission imperative to mobilize all of their cancer.org content. She said she wanted to distribute the cancer.org experience as widely as possible to as broad an audience as possible. Now, I would say that having a great mobile optimized site and web presence is imperative for pretty much every company or organization with an internet presence. It's not something that's unique to a particular vertical or domain. At Google, we want to provide you with the guidance that you need to build really great mobile websites. And we want to be able to tell you about how the designs of sites that give a great experience are different to those that have user experience flaws. And we want to do this on the basis of data versus expert opinion, so that we can all have confidence in the changes that we think should be made. And so to do this, we decided to run a study. I wrote a research plan up, and then we teamed up with Answer Lab. There's a user research company, and they have to scale because this was a pretty big usability study. They have to scale to make this happen and to examine how a range of users interacted with a diverse group of mobile websites. I'm going to tell you briefly about how we set up and ran the study. So we studied user interaction on 100 different sites on mobile. And this ranged from large retailers through information providers and service providers. And we also included some lesser-known websites that have been growing in adoption because we wanted to make sure that we weren't only capturing what the biggest and most popular sites were doing. Participants brought in their own iOS or Android devices to use in the study because we wanted them to feel familiar with those devices. We wanted them to be clear about where the back button is and so forth. There were 119 participants in the study. That's 119 separate user studies, each of 1 hour. They each came in individually. So that's a very large usability study. And the participants worked through tasks for each site. The method we used was traditional usability testing with Think Aloud protocol. And so they spoke out loud as they were doing the tasks. This provides us with insight into their understanding and details about when they got stuck or lost. And they also provided ratings for the sites. The results of the large usability study that we ran have been collated to form 25 mobile web design principles. The key findings are intended to help you build better mobile sites and increase engagement with and conversion for your business. And we've categorized the principles into 5 sections. The first one is mobile homepage and site navigation, then site search, principles to do with site search, mobile commerce and conversions, optimizing form entry, and form factor and usability. The principles are all about creating a better experience for users to enable them to have a trouble-free experience on a mobile website, whether that's a content informational site or a retail or e-commerce site or a lead generation site. We're going to look at some examples of these principles from the 25 we've published, and we've created this guidance based off the study results. So let's start with looking at a few principles from the category that relates to homepage and site navigation. So the first and most important thing to do in considering a mobile site is to figure out the primary purpose of the mobile web for the business. Why are we creating a mobile website for this business? What experience do we want and expect people to get from it? So in our study, we tested interfaces similar to those you see here. Participants struggled with the one on the left. The only call to action there is learn more, and they really weren't convinced that they were going to be able to complete their tasks that way. They weren't convinced that they were going to be able to get what they came for. The site on the right is the site from Progressive. It's a great example of prioritizing key calls and tasks for a lead generation company. On a women's magazine site that we tested, there were buttons such as specials and looks, and these were very vague, and participants, again, didn't know what they would get. So mobile users really want their information here and now. So in developing a mobile site, the most important thing to do is to prioritize the key topics and calls to action and feature them prominently. Secondary content and calls to action can be accessed either further down the screen or behind menu icons. Secondly, it's important to keep menus on mobile short and sweet. So many desktop sites have quite extensive menus, and that can work well in certain circumstances. But on mobile, people certainly don't have the patience to scroll through long lists and drop-down lists of menu options to try and find the categories they want. So consider how you can present the fewest menu items possible. For instance, if you look at Macy's, that's an American retailer, on mobile, you'll find that their product categories are being condensed. They presented users with a shorter, more clearly defined list than on desktop. So if you look at their desktop site, there's more categories. But I think the clever work they've done is making these categories on mobile be very clearly defined and distinct, so people have no hesitation where they want to go for their item. When mobile users navigate through a site, they want an easy way to get back to the home page. So that's our third principle here. For example, perhaps they want to get back to do another search from the beginning, or perhaps they want to just browse to a different piece of information or a different item on the website. So in the study, we found that participants usually expected that tapping on the logo at the top of the page would take them back to the home page no matter where they were in the site. And if that didn't work, they became quite frustrated. So here I'm showing you a great example of this principle implemented well in 1-800-Flowers. So let's summarize the home page takeaways from what we've just presented. These were: keep calls to action front and center. So make sure you understand, and it's the most important thing, the priorities of what you're trying to achieve with the website and how people will experience that on the go. Keep menu items short and sweet so people can easily navigate them. Make it easy to get back to the home page. So now let's look at the importance of mobile site search. Along with a home page that focuses on calls to action, our study showed just how important it is to provide good, clear search functionality. So the design on the right there that comes from Home Depot, well, nobody, hopefully, can miss that search functionality when they come to that page on Home Depot. Now, this principle, make site search visible and make it clear on mobile, that might not sound all that surprising coming from Google. But to tell you the absolute truth, there was debate in our team before we ran this study. And that was because some people on the team felt that, we know that typing on mobile can be quite a pain point for people. Some people thought that searching by browsing may be therefore more important on mobile because of this pain point with typing. But our study certainly revealed to us how key search is, and it was found to be particularly so on retail sites. People want to search for the item they're looking for. And on non-retail sites, users are unable to find a call to action. If users can't find that call to action to fit their need, we found that, they often turn to search next. So they're kind of looking around, browsing the site, but if they can't find what they're looking for, they want to see that nice, clear search functionality there. So site search needs to be highly visible on the home page, not hidden behind icons. And Home Depot and Macy's and many other sites manage to do this. So really, there's kind of no excuse not to. So make sure you're doing this on your site. And then we can think about search a little bit more, because to really scaffold the user's tasks, the search needs to be smart. Signs of smart search include providing autocomplete in the search field, suggesting search terms and filters, correcting misspellings, providing related matches in search results. And all these combination of things together, they're all about getting users to their relevant search results as soon as possible, which is really, really important on mobile. So let's also ensure that site search results are relevant. So this goes for site search results as well as the search features we just talked about, like autocomplete. And that's what I've got in this example here that you can see. Too often we saw results like those on the left. And in this example, someone's put the word kid in, but a lot of the kind of suggestions that have come up are really, not useful, incomprehensible. The word kid is part of other words. So the algorithm really isn't doing its job here. A much better example is on the right, where kids surfaces these different options: kids sweaters, kids boots, kids shoes, kids jeans. On other occasions, we saw lots of irrelevant search results in the results that we did, and we have participants do in the study. And we found that people really don't have the patience to swipe through multiple pages of results. It's bad on desktop, it's even worse on mobile. If the first few results aren't relevant, then people might leave and go elsewhere. So one way forward to help you with, your search functionality, the different features you can offer for search on mobile, might be to consider using Google's custom search engine in your site, because that brings a lot of these features in. Now, something that we touched on just now was one of these ways to help people get to their search results as soon as possible was using filters. So filters go even further for helping users find the results that they need. In some cases in our study, we found, as the example on the left shows, that even though filters were available, they were located off the screen and required scrolling to. So the repercussions for not using filters well, firstly, not using them at all, but secondly, perhaps, using them, but putting them in a location that users can't find, was that if users didn't have filters and couldn't narrow their search results in any way, and they had a large number of search results, they often abandoned their tasks because they couldn't reduce the number of results effectively, and there was no way of going through them on mobile. Note also that the user should never be able to inadvertently filter the search results to a null set. But, we actually did see this happen in the study. People would apply filters and then be left with no search results at all. So one thing that we found helpful was, as people use controls, it can be useful to let the user know how many results they'll end up with if they were to apply a particular filter. So let's take a quick review of those site search takeaways that we've been through. So the first one was make sure the site search is visible on your site. Take a look at your site now, and if it's not, if it's hidden or behind icons or you don't have one, that's something immediately to fix. Ensure that site results are relevant, and implement filters to narrow results. We found they were incredibly handy for people, and people did look for them and use them. Now let's look at that important topic of mobile conversions, mobile commerce. There are a number of ways we discovered that the design of sites can help people towards conversion on mobile. We found that people want to convert on their own terms, very definitely. And so we want sites to be designed in a way that will work for them and not against them. So firstly, let's talk about letting users purchase as a guest. This is the kind of experience I was looking for when I was purchasing that snow queen outfit. So if purchasing or sending off for something is something that users can do on your client's website, then there needs to be an option to clearly enable users to check out as guests. The guest option was really universally preferred when users didn't have an existing account. And why did we find that worse? Well, we found that they perceive significant benefits from not having to choose and remember a password when they're in the middle of the task of purchasing something. So we can think back to my Snow Queen purchasing task. And I was purchasing this. I don't want to have to stop and think of a password that requires, so many characters and so many special characters. They also found that, they didn't want to, at that moment in time, think about, do they want to receive marketing emails or not? They described guest checkout as being convenient, simple, easy, and quick. Those are the words that they applied to it. At the end of the guest checkout process, you, as the retailer, have another opportunity to get the users to create an account. And you can communicate tangible benefits to them for doing so. For example, that might be that they can track their order. There are other ways to help users convert too. Another useful way to streamline the conversion experience for users is to know and use what already exists in terms of information that the user has provided. We also found that autofilling, when possible, was of huge benefit to users. Believe it or not, participants were surprised and delighted when companies autofilled or populated information they'd already provided in a form. And I'm quite kind of sad to have to tell you about that, because really it should be something that's standard that we're doing. In their experience, in the experience of the participants, it was much more typical for them to have to struggle through forms or abandon the task on mobile and have to do it in a different way. And it's just frustrating for them to have to put in information twice. So things to do. For registered users, remember and pre-fill their preferences. And for new users, offer third-party checkout and sign-in services so that they can kind of whiz through those parts of the whole sign-in, account creation, everything else process. One specific example is to check you don't require users to enter shipping or billing information that already exists in a third-party checkout account that you might have integrated. So we did find in our study one website who offered a third-party checkout option for payment, but they actually required users to enter their shipping address first, which was unnecessary. And then the users had to enter it twice, which, definitely leads to frustration. So providing functionality to allow users to pick up where they left off was also something that we understood from the study to be significantly important. Today people are converting on a variety of devices, and in some circumstances, they might want to, do some further research, come back to the product they're looking at later on. Perhaps they get interrupted and they need to come back later on. Perhaps they just want to do this on a different device. Perhaps they want to move to a desktop and get a bigger view. So there's lots of reasons why people might want to pick up where they left off. So we suggest, seek opportunities to scaffold that kind of behavior in the functionality you provide and facilitate cross-channel conversion through your mobile website. We really need to think about how can we help users who move from one device to another, or perhaps simply want to get back to where they were on the same device. Now, we observed some really quite painful experience with respect to this. People would try and copy and paste hyperlinks and email them to themselves. And that's pretty tricky and fiddly on mobile, and it can be quite painful. You have to copy the link, find your email client, open it up, paste the link, and of course you've now kind of left your customers have now left your website, so hopefully they'll find their way back to it. We found users did that. They emailed URLs to themselves, and we also found participants did things like pin items to follow up on later. So, having your own company think about, or, if you're an agency, having your clients' companies think about a seamless way to do this is very much a need, as users are finding their own kind of convoluted ways to do this for themselves. So while there aren't any sort of distinct best practices right now, I think the main thing is to think about how can you sort of stop users from leaving your site but provide them with that functionality. So maybe you can provide them an opportunity to email directly from the site, pin an item, those kind of things. And so the best practice here is to provide that functionality so that they can remain on your site and pick up again from whichever device they come to later. Related to this, you do need to create a consistent URL structure, of course, on your site so that when people share URLs from their mobile to their desktop, they can use them. And on that note, Google's recommendation is to build a responsive site that enables a consistent URL structure rather than resorting to an m-dot site where you have to redirect users between sites. So let's look at the summaries of conversion, commerce, and conversion takeaways. So let's users purchase as a guest, using pre-existing information so that users don't have to put in things twice, and enabling users to pick up where they left off. Now we're going to shift gears a bit and talk about forms. Now, filling out web forms on mobile devices is arguably the most difficult experience on the mobile web. And you've probably experienced this yourselves. When users complain about browsing on their web on their mobile phones, they almost often blame one of two things, and that's having to pinch and zoom in order to read the text and filling out forms. In our study, we observed a lot of users completing a lot of forms on websites, and we learned a lot from it. So let's take a look at some of the lessons learned. So first of all, you can probably see that the form on the left looks like a really painful experience. And so the lesson here is about designing a form that's efficient for users to fill in and not overwhelming people like the one on the left does. So we've collectively learned and applied a lot about how to design efficient forms on desktop. But somehow a lot of that didn't get translated over to mobile, we found. We saw way too many forms that looked like the one on the left in our study, and we saw users' reactions when they encountered them. So one thing that we found particularly useful was that with a multi-step form, it's really helpful to chunk the information. If you look on the right, the progressive form, you can see it's chunked with different labels at the top. And it's helpful to place the easiest steps at the beginning and show users a labeled progress bar so they know what to expect. So in this example, the form is nicely chunked into manageable steps, and each step is very clearly labeled so users know what's coming up. And none of the steps in this example were disproportionately more difficult than any others. And that gives users confidence and a sense of progression. We did encounter one website that had gone to the extent of chunking the form in this way with the labeled steps. But participants abandoned that site. And why was that? It was because the first step of 5 was so long that gave users the expectation that all the other steps would be the same experience. So that was such a shame for that website because they'd done so many things right, but that experience on that first chunk and the form was just overwhelming. And so, think about making them sort of equal length, equal effort, starting with something pretty easy to build people into this. So make sure your forms look like much more like this chunk form on the right than the extensive long form on the left. So the next lesson is to streamline information entry, and it's really about taking a good close look to make sure you're cutting to the bone and stripping out every unnecessary tap or swipe needed in your form. So in other words, think about every tap and make every tap count. So this is really about implementation level of detail and making sure the development team are sort of making sure that the form is efficient for users. So when submitting information, our users in our study noticed and appreciated websites that would automatically present number pads for entering zip codes, for instance. So using the contextual keyboard, making sure that comes up, or automatically advancing phone number fields as they're entered. All those things are very important. And it can be really painful when it doesn't happen. And So even though two forms, as in this example you're seeing here, can look very much alike, the experience can be profoundly different. And that's because there are different ways to implement them. There are ways to make it more efficient for the user, and ways, if you ignore all those things, then the experience can be quite painful. So seek out opportunities to eliminate wasted taps in your form. Every extra tap or swipe actually increases the odds that users make a mistake or encounter issues. So remember I said that completing forms on mobile is probably one of the most painful things to do on a mobile device. Well, I think it's even more painful when you have to complete them for a second time, right? I'm sure you've all been in that experience too. You've done the form, you hit submit, and lo and behold, the form comes back to you saying you got something wrong. You have to hunt for where you got it wrong, and you have to figure out what that error was. Well, we saw that happen quite a lot in our study. But we also saw some really nice best practices, and one of that was to do real-time validation of forms. So as the user goes through in this example, they will be told after each entry in each field whether there's something wrong and it needs correcting. That means users never have to have that experience of completing the whole thing, submitting, and then having it thrown back at them. And of course, there are some standard web best practices when it comes to helping users recover from and correct their errors. And these are things like providing really clear labeling right next to the field where they got something wrong, making sure that the text is really, really helpful and not cryptic, and highlighting those fields that need correcting so users exactly know where to go and so forth. So the best thing you can do, though, is implement this real-time validation of forms. So let's have a look at our form entry takeaways. So these are designing efficient forms, chunking the information nicely, making sure that the form doesn't look overwhelming and daunting. Streamlining information entry, so you can do everything you can to make sure that you've used information that users have given you before, but also that you count every click and every swipe and make sure there's no unnecessary interaction that the user has to do to complete the form. And then providing real-time validation of forms. So the last section we're going to cover is called form factor and usability. There are a number of site-wide design principles that we uncovered during the course of watching multiple users, and we're going to look at these now. So one of the main reasons that you go ahead and make a mobile optimized site is because it's really painful for users to have to pinch and zoom all the time, which is often what's required when you view a desktop site on mobile. It's really hard to zoom and pan on the mobile phone, and really what happens is it really leads to trouble with reading text, viewing images, and it can make things undiscoverable. So you might think that your menu item or your button is really nicely placed, but if users have to pan and zoom, they're not going to perhaps find it. So some really frustrating experiences that our users had in the study was when the home screen loaded fully zoomed in. So that was a bad experience, and that example is given on the left here. And when a user zooms in on the screen, you of course lose control over the design, and those discoverability issues happen. So make sure there aren't any areas of your site that require users to pinch and zoom. Now, images on mobile, of course, they can be very small. And so the best practice is to ensure that any image that a user might want to enlarge, it's possible to do that. And you can do that by making them tappable or easily expandable, the images themselves. So on retail sites, customers want to see what they're buying. They very definitely do. And the study showed that people expect to be able to view high-resolution close-ups of products to get a better look. They want to see details and textures on clothing to gauge quality. And they would get frustrated if they couldn't do that. A good example of providing tappable, expandable images can be found on the jQuery site, as you can see here. So I suggest you go and play around with that site and see how that experience is. Now, one of our most important principles is about taking all these design best practices and creating a mobile optimized site and experience. Our study clearly illustrated how users strongly preferred mobile optimized sites over desktop sites viewed on mobile devices. Desktop sites had lower usage ratings, lower task success rates, and more observed user errors and issues than mobile optimized sites did. However, we found that some sites mixed together mobile optimized pages and pages from desktop sites. For example, the home pages were mobile optimized, but then perhaps you'd go a few screens in and some tasks led to a desktop experience on a mobile device. Well, these types of sites scored even lower across the board, more errors and lower ratings than fully desktop sites, although the number of sites we tested was low, but this was most clearly the case. It can be tempting to go with a gradual phased rollout of a mobile optimized website, especially since mobile home pages and landing pages can often be much more easily and quickly launched than search results and product pages. And I know that some sites have thousands and thousands of product pages. In reality, however, you probably are going to be doing yourself, your company, and your users a disservice if you take that route. And you'd be better off just waiting until the entire mobile optimized experience was complete. If you do need to launch in some way that's a phased approach, you really need to take a look at the navigation patterns that people are using through your site and make sure that you're not mobile optimizing parts where people are going to have to move from mobile optimized site to desktop web pages. Because basically what happens is, you know, they're thinking about their task, but then that fact of moving from mobile optimized to desktop, it makes them lose track, they get disoriented, and they lose focus. So it's creating a poor experience. So let's look at those form factor and usability takeaways. These are: don't make users pinch and zoom, provide expandable, tappable images because people want to see these product details up close, and optimize your entire site for mobile. So that brings me towards the end of all the principles we're reviewing today, but there are more. I said at the beginning there's 25 different principles. So we hope that the ideas can help you improve your user experience on your site. And because you're unlikely to have memorized those, and there are more principles that we've published, there is a white paper where you can go ahead and read about all these tips. And in addition, we also have a site called Web Fundamentals that we launched at Google I/O this year. It's an online resource to show you how to build for the multi-device web. And if I've just covered the what to do, which is all the details in the white paper, then you can think of Web Fundamentals as the how to do it. It covers a lot of the technical guidance on how to avoid many of the common mistakes people make when building mobile sites. So that brings me to the end of my talk, and I believe now we're going to move on to the Q&A section.
Thank you very much, Jenny. That's very, very interesting and a lot of very good principles to follow. And I think one question that came up here and seems to be very popular based on +1 notes is, will this presentation be available?
Yes, so actually it's available in a couple of different forms. First of all, we have the white paper, so that contains all 25 principles, and you can find that on the Think Multiscreen site, and I'm sure Frederick's also probably going to be sending it out. Secondly, I did a longer version of this presentation at Google I/O, so if you find the Google I/O site for 2014, you can hear a longer version of this presentation.
Well, what I think might probably be the easiest is if after the Hangout, we'll just post the links on the video. So either through the community or YouTube, in the comments, you'll find the links to the materials, and I think that'll be the easiest way to find them.
Absolutely, excellent. Thank you, Frederick.
There's a couple of questions from Andy as well. One of them, me being a numbers junkie as well. I don't know if you have them on hand or if you can share them.
Okay, I'm just taking a look now. Is this, would you recommend a mobile-specific site or responsive design site? I've started hearing more people move towards a mobile-specific site, especially in retail. So Google has taken a position on this recently, but we understand that it doesn't, your context and your circumstances might be the most important factor to consider. But earlier this year, the message that Google put out was that we really think responsive design is the way to go. And the reason for this is that because you're dealing with one code base, so over time, you don't have to maintain different code bases. There's a couple of other things I can say about this. responsive design isn't a silver bullet. It's not just the case of shrinking your desktop design to go onto mobile. You do have to think of the case of the different contexts that people are using different size devices in. So think about when people are on the go on the mobile, what are going to be those primary calls to action? And so it's not like it doesn't take design work. You have to think about that sort of human-computer interaction and interaction design and design for those different contexts. So it's certainly not a silver bullet. The other thing I wanted to address is that responsive designs often get pinged for people being concerned about performance and speed because it is this one code base. So I'm less on the technical side myself, but I've been talking a lot to our web development team, and I understand that a lot of those performance principles, performance issues can be addressed nowadays. I don't have the specific details for you, but I believe that some of those are in the Web Fundamentals site. And certainly I've done some Google searches and found both documentation about, I think a lot of people repeat everybody else on the web and talk about the performance issues with responsive sites. But I did find a couple of more recent documents that addressed a lot of those performance issues. So responsive design we advocate is the way to go. Now, we understand that obviously there are sometimes reasons not to do that. Perhaps you only just developed a lovely brand new version of your desktop site, and therefore now would not be the good time to invest a lot of money in creating a responsive site. Doing something mobile optimized might be better. But just for the idea of people actually want to get to everything on your desktop site, on your mobile site. It's just perhaps the experience should not necessarily be the same. How things are laid out, how they get to things, how those things are shown should possibly be different in order to take advantage of the mobile screen and use that in the best way possible.
And I think there we're already touching on the two questions, one from Andy and one from Attic regarding how to actually choose the content to surface on a mobile device, with Andy's question being more related to then the behavior behind it. Are users actually that happy to keep navigating through a longer list, or would they prefer to actually click through a couple of links?
Oh, I see. Okay, so let me take each of these in turn. Yeah, so basically, we've covered much of the first question, which is users do expect to find the same content on mobile and different devices as they do on desktop. This gives them, they kind of have a mental model and a mental map, and especially if they're used to your design on desktop already. Now, obviously, there's a lot of companies that are mobile first now, coming up, some of the newer startups, so that's a bit of a different context. But if you have a very established desktop presence, then yes, I do think people expect to, in nearly all situations, and especially in retail, be able to find everything that they would find on a desktop site. But it might be the way that you lay that information down or make that information accessible is very different. Perhaps on mobile, you can make use of the opportunity for people to swipe through different images. Perhaps if there's a lot of product information associated with a particular product, that can be chunked better than it is on desktop sites. So certainly thinking about how you lay that information down for mobile is a really important part of it. And then whether people can prefer to have a continual list or happy to move through search results pages. I think it depends on the performance. I think it's performance issue more than anything that you have to think about on mobile. So getting that performance up, if you can make the continual scroll work, then I think that's a great experience. I personally also, related to this, if you do move through pages, I do think it's important to have those different pages numbered. I do believe that people sort of have some mental memory of where they saw different items before in their searching context right now. So I would be checking on performance issues for that.
And that brings us then to the numbers question as well. So I'm actually quite curious about this myself. But in the white paper or in other resources, would numbers like Andy's question here with cross-channel conversions from the study, how many people wanted to actually move and finish the purchase at a later stage, or perhaps even different device?
Yeah, do you know, I don't really have in terms of numbers on that. So I'm afraid I don't have data on that specifically, and partly because that's the way we did this particular study. So this was in the lab study of people doing different tasks that we asked them to do in the lab. So that's very different to a study that we might do that's more based in the real world. So we do have methods in my discipline, in my user research discipline, of studying people and their use of devices in the real world. And so those methods I would apply would be things like diary studies, where we get people to document what they're doing at different times. Or, of course, nowadays it's possible to do logging, data logging. So probably the best data we could get from this would be some sort of log data. For this would be log data. I don't have the figures for that, but certainly, you know, Google is, Frederick, you could probably talk to this better than me. Google is investing in looking at cross-device tracking. And so, you know, clearly Google has got a team on that, and they consider it very important. Both, you know, cross-device tracking from different devices, but also in terms of, you know, yeah, just the different experiences people have on the different places they may purchase. Frederick, do you want to add anything to that in terms of those projects?
I think when it comes to cross-device, just overall, my favorite resources are actually the AdWords and analytics blogs. Case studies come up now and then that refer to this. Of course, they're always talking about percentages, so that's insightful in that sense. But the overall scale remains a mystery to us. But we can of course guess by what brand is in question, what the actual absolute impact might be behind those percentages. But yeah, definitely keep an eye on the AdWords and analytics blogs, and also the communities, because they'll surface these case studies as well.
Yeah, but I mean, certainly we're seeing it important in Google, so hopefully that at least gives you some confidence in. And you know, something I'd like to see in relation to that is, like, I think it relates very much to the next question as well, as with regard to like mobile frameworks and the different elements that some of those have in terms of adhering to the mobile principles. You know, perhaps we would like to consider what different widgets and elements could be created with regard to helping people on cross-device, you know, being able to pick up where they left off, you know, because the solutions we saw for that out there, like I said, there was kind of no best practices for that, and often people used functionality that was ideally, I think the developers of the sites themselves had put this functionality there for people often to share with others, but often people were using that to share with themselves at a later date. So, you know, email, that kind of thing. Yeah, in our study we saw participants use that for themselves, not necessarily always use it for sharing with others. So in terms of that question with regard to the recommended use of mobile frameworks, certainly, you know, there needs to be good, also easier ways for people to develop mobile websites. And I know that Google has been partnering with certain vendors, and these are listed on our site. And so we are working with them to encourage the adoption of these different principles in the functionality they offer.
And there's one more question from Luis, and by the way, everyone, these are great questions, so please keep them coming. We still have just under 10 minutes, but Luis is asking about what you would recommend for a large e-commerce site like say IKEA, Best Buy, in terms of creating a mobile site, responsive, dedicated, or an app.
Oh, okay, so yeah, well, we've addressed the responsive versus dedicated site. previously, and so my response here would be ideally a responsive site if you're in a position to do that, but making sure that you consider the different scenarios, use cases of different devices, and consider what those primary calls to action are on the different devices. In terms of the one thing that you bring up that we haven't covered before is sort of app versus mobile site, and I know this is something that a lot of people often ask and a lot of people think about. Well, so something I've heard before is that one thing to think about is, having that mobile site there for new users, because that's how new users are going to discover you, and having an app there for more engaged users. But personally, I feel that that's a little bit simplistic, or I definitely think it's a simplistic view. I do believe that we can have fully, a great customer base of engaged users on an app if you create an app, and ideally you should do that. But I also believe that you can have a big community of engaged users on the mobile web as well. I don't like to think of the mobile web, and I don't think it's appropriate to think of the mobile web only for your first-time customer, who you are then definitely going to convert to app. We all know that people are getting more and more apps on their phone, and it's an issue that they will download the app but not necessarily revisit it, sometimes perhaps even forgetting that they've got it on their phone. That's why we have some projects nowadays in Google that is advocating deep linking into apps, and you can participate in those programs if you feel that that would that you need mechanisms for your customers to re-engage with you through the app that they've already downloaded. So you have to provide Google with some information, but all that information is out there. We've made that available, and you can participate in that, and so that search results can bring up the possibility of deep linking into an app. But then, a mobile site is really important for engaging users too, because there's a lot of people who, don't want to download any more apps, or perhaps they don't feel that they're necessarily going to be a loyal customer, but they actually become one. And so I think having a really great experience, a great mobile site itself is really important. So, I mean, in a way, I can understand, like, resource-wise, it's not a great answer. You need both. You need a mobile site presence, and depending on your business, an app might be very useful. Some companies use app to provide a different sort of experience, or I mean, if you think of financial institutions, an app is often for people who hold an account, and the website is often for people who want to get information and about information about loans and so forth. So it does depend a little bit on your vertical, I feel, but in terms of retail sites, I think both are very important.
And this is actually a topic that we run a Hangout about a week ago, where for a full hour we actually deep dive into this question about which one to focus on. So for anyone interested in this, you can find it on the community, thinking strategically about apps and mobile sites, or on YouTube. So please have a look at those videos. It really dives deep into this topic.
Right.
So at the moment there are no other questions here, but I think we have a couple of minutes still. So if anyone has a last-minute question, please feel free to submit it. But in the meantime, there's one thing that comes to mind for me, because I'm an account manager for finance specifically, so I deal with a lot of forms on a daily basis.
Right.
But how do you see these principles tie into verticals overall? I know retail has come up many times during your presentation.
Sure. Yeah. So the 100 sites we tested, they actually ranged over all the verticals, and they included service sites, information sites, lead generation sites. And the principles we're presenting in the 25 mobile principles are designed for all sites. They're not specific to a specific vertical. Now, I feel that that is the case, that these are general principles. But of course, as you sort of just mentioned, with finance and perhaps other verticals have similar focuses. Finance has a huge number of forms. Lead generation sites have a huge number of forms. And so, like, there are actually more principles than I've necessarily presented here with regard to forms. There's lots of information more generally on the web of good form practices. In fact, there's whole books on it. So if you want to get really into it, there's more resources out there. We wanted to keep our sort of resource set, 25 principles, to show the most important ones we found through data, so that it's not just expert opinion. And I think that's very important. I did a literature review actually before we started this study, and there are a lot of principles already out there, and a lot of them are good. But we wanted to make sure that ours were based on data, and so I can, firmly say that, like, having tested 100 different websites across different verticals, these apply really well and are the most important ones that came out. But there are many things we can do with forms, many like intricate best practices, and so diving a little bit more deeply into that would be more important for financial sites and lead generation sites, insurance sites, that kind of thing. Obviously, retail sites, similarly, there's best practices with regard to checkout, with regard to carts, that kind of thing. And again, you will need to dive into different, more detailed resources if you really want to get into the details there. So yeah, I think every sort of vertical has its own domain where it can deep dive further.
Thanks. I see we have a last question in here, which let's see.
Focuses on retail. How important is it to allow people to easily remove items from the basket during checkout? I completely agree with you, Andy. We should offer that till the last moment before they click purchase. It's very, very frustrating for people to get through. I've noticed it also. I completely agree with you. I've noticed it also. You get through, and then, because it's easy for people to make mistakes as well, I think we've often not only, you should be able to remove, not only delete items completely, but also be able to remove the quantity of items, because it's often the case that people accidentally, have clicked twice. They've got 2 of those same items in the cart, and they don't actually realize until the moment before they press the final key. But in those last stages, you often don't have the opportunity to take it out of the basket. Then you find people hit the back button, and not all the sites cope well with that at all, and so they get into a mess, potentially getting frustrated, well, definitely getting frustrated and potentially abandoning the whole thing. So I think, you're not giving control to the user if you don't let people remove items from baskets, and you're just going to create frustration. So, having visibility into what you're purchasing, having that transparency, and most importantly, having control until you actually purchase. Agree 100% with you, Andy.
I see that there are a couple more questions coming in.
What should be the focus for emerging market? Yeah, that's one. What should be the focus for emerging markets for advertisers, as most users don't have advanced smartphones? That's a very interesting question. So, personally, I do think this is changing over time. As you probably heard, Google and other companies are releasing very low-cost phones. I have done some research in emerging markets, and I do see the low-cost Android phones being pretty dominant. I see them a lot. I know there are areas with a big focus on feature phones still, but I see that changing over time a great deal. In fact, in some of the emerging markets, we see quite interesting. There's quite interesting phones out there, right, with smartphones with people using several different SIMs because that's how they need to operate. So basically, when people are using the lower cost phones, I do think we should focus on, it is going to go more smartphone, but we need to focus on, I think, a lot on making sure that the product is not only well designed, which is what I'm particularly focusing on, the principles to make a good user experience, but also, especially focus on performance. And that's when I think you'll be referring to the Web Fundamentals site to make sure the performance is top notch. Perhaps we should also think about where people need to do things offline, or this kind of thing. So performance, offline use, and basically whatever you need to do to support those low-end smartphones in the future, because that's definitely the way it's going.
And then I think, as Luis states in his question as well, the last one. How do you feel about calls to action on landing pages where desktop has a lead gen orientation, but for mobile it's click to call? Would you present both options to maintain user experience when talking about responsive landing pages?
Call to action on landing pages. Mobile's click to call. Which percent both options to maintain? Ah, okay, yeah. I think it depends on the priorities in your business, right? Yeah, I mean, if you're finding that users on mobile have a preference to click to call, and that's a really important action for them on mobile, then prioritizing that is clearly important. But if you're depends on the site that you're talking about, I think. And it depends. It depends how. So basically, I think the question is, would you, if users are doing click to call on mobile, like, is there a need to create a responsive site? I think take a look at your logs now. That's what I think. If your logs show that a lot of users are looking for your site and end up on the desktop site and are trying to use it, then clearly there's a need there for you to have a good functional website that could be a responsive site. So I would look at something I haven't emphasized before, and I should have done probably earlier in this presentation, was like there's a couple of things we can do to uncover experiences on our site. We can do our own usability testing in a kind of we'll call it like guerrilla way, or basically easy way. It doesn't have to be too complicated. We can there's resources actually from the Google Ventures website. There's a great set of resources if you want to do your own user testing. The Google Ventures site have set up a whole suite of resources for people to do their own testing, and the key name there to look for is Michael Margolis, and he's presented lots of resources there. But also, of course, look at your analytics, which was where I was going to come to with this. Look at your analytics. Are people really wanting to get to the website? Where are they going on the website? When they're on mobile, what are they trying to do? So even if you've only got a desktop site today, you can look at those analytics and see what they're trying to do on mobile.
Actually, on that note, using content experiments through analytics is, I would say, a great way to safely test implementing all the principles to make sure that if something for some reason goes wrong, then you get numbers on it, you know what was tested, and you can redesign the test and run it again. So step by step in the right direction.
Yep, that's an excellent suggestion. So getting all these different pieces of feedback, the data shows you what people are doing, and then using user studies, observations, you can sort of see why people are doing that.
Great. Cool. That brings us to the end of the Hangout. So Jenny, thank you very much for joining us today. It's been very, very interesting and great to hear so many good questions from all our viewers as well. So we'll post the resources in the comments on the video. So please, everyone, have a look at those, because I'm sure this conversation could go on and on for the rest of the day if we started really digging deep into what's out there.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And everyone else, thank you for tuning in.
Bye-bye.
Bye.